Welcome to Making Sense of Money, the podcast where we make tough financial topics easier to understand. I'm Kimber Beckler.
And I'm Andrew Pellegrini. Today we're diving into a topic that affects everyone, cost of living. So whether you're thinking about relocating or just trying to build a budget for where you are now, understanding cost of living differences between different locations is really valuable.
I totally agree, and I'm happy that we're covering this topic today. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is the cost of living?
So cost of living refers to the amount of money needed to cover basic expenses such as housing, food, taxes, and healthcare in a specific place and time. It's a way to measure how affordable or expensive it is to live in different areas. And this is not just for the United States, not just for Illinois, but across the globe.
Absolutely. It's important because it directly affects how far your dollar will go. So, for instance, $50,000 in one city may not stretch quite as far as it would in another. So, it's definitely something to consider when you're taking that job and considering relocating or staying where you are.
It can even differ within different neighborhoods. For example, in Chicago, if you live in one neighborhood, it might be a lot more expensive for housing or eating out compared to another neighborhood. So that's another thing to keep in mind. It can differ just within a mile depending on where you are. So let's talk about regional differences in the United States specifically, since that's where Kimber and I are. So the cost of living can vary pretty significantly from one region to another, like the Midwest versus the East Coast.
Absolutely. So just like you said, the Northeast and the West Coast are generally considered, well, they're not considered, they are more expensive than the Midwest and the South. And this is due to a variety of factors like higher housing costs, taxes, and overall demand. And Andrea, you raised a really valuable point about just, a couple miles making all the difference. Even when you're dealing with property taxes, like school district locations, everything, when you move neighborhoods, even in the same community, if you go into a different school district, you can have wildly different property taxes. So it's something to consider as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. When I was looking for a house, I looked in the Champaign-Urbana area, right? And they are different municipalities, Champaign and Urbana, even though they butt up against each other. Like I could cross the street and be in Champaign from Urbana, depending on where I'm at. But the property taxes in Urbana were twice as high as the property taxes in Champaign. So that made me think about longer term costs of housing when I was considering different options for Urbana versus Champaign. So that I'm glad you brought that up.
You say them Chambana, they're 2 for 1.
They're like squished.
And so together. I didn't even that's a good point. Like that even that street, there's differences across the street. So very important to consider.
So cities like New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles are notorious for their higher cost of living, whereas cities in the Midwest, such as Cleveland or St. Louis or Springfield, are much more affordable.
So we just kind of covered this, but just reinforcing that on state and local levels, there's differences. So let's focus on Illinois and how diverse its cost of living scenarios are.
If we include Chicago, Champaign-Urbana, and Springfield as examples, they're all in Illinois, but they all have very, very different costs of living profiles. And it could depend on the type of expense you're comparing. For example, gas here might be less expensive than Chicago, whereas buying a car might be more expensive in Springfield compared to Chicago because of how far that you have to go and how long they keep inventory on a lot.
So in Chicago, the cost of living there is significantly higher than other parts of the state, and housing is especially a major factor. Buying or renting in Chicago is very pricey.
Plus, daily expenses like transportation, groceries, and entertainment can all add up very quickly. Chicago also has higher taxes compared to many other places in Illinois, but not compared to all other places. There are pockets of places that have higher taxes.
And when we bring up transportation, we also have to remember that in Chicago, there are a lot of options for transportation, public transportation there. So that could be considered too, whereas you might not need to have a car like you would in other downstate areas where having a car is definitely a necessity to get around. But, in Champaign, Urbana, it's a college town, so it offers a little bit of a different scenario. The housing is definitely more affordable, and you might have cheaper dining and entertainment options, especially when they do concerts and everything. Those ticket prices are going to be much more affordable than those same shows would be in Chicago.
But it's also important to note that some costs, like utilities or healthcare, might not be drastically different here in Champaign-Urbana compared to Chicago.
In Springfield, we're the state capital, and we offer a really balanced cost of living. It's generally more affordable than Chicago, but slightly more expensive than Champaign-Urbana. And I think that's something, especially with government employees, it's funny to compare with people who have the same positions and are located in Springfield versus Chicago, because even though they make similar amounts of money, the way that they are able to utilize their paycheck every 2 weeks is very different. So it's something to definitely consider, that even if you have a job, the dream job, are you able to have it in a different location that could be more affordable?
And it can support your desired quality of life, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Cost of living impacts your ability to afford a certain type of lifestyle.
Because it's interesting, like I have a counterpart in a different division, and they're in Chicago. They have a 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom apartment, and their rent is significantly more than my mortgage payment on a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom house. So it's just wild how lifestyles can be very different when you examine where we are choosing to work and live.
Well, just to add on to that, Kimber, I talk a lot to students, and they might be comparing offers in Chicago versus Springfield, and they might have a higher salary in Chicago, but they don't think about the cost of living being significantly different. And so sometimes I talk about, like, well, how do you like to spend your time? Do you like to eat out a lot? Is that something that you want the flexibility to do? Have you compared what the actual costs are going to be, or the availability of housing, right? Like, there might not be as affordable options right now for when you need to start your job in Springfield as you might think, because in smaller communities, sometimes affordable housing is harder to find because of the availability and the demand, depending on kind of time of year and what's going on. So those are all things to consider if you're looking at cost of living as a component of salary negotiation, or how to maintain a lifestyle that you want outside of your career. So let's talk about something related to cost of living that can impact your salary, since we talked about salary negotiation. It's called a cost of living adjustment, or COLA.
Okay, so a cost of living adjustment is a change in salary to match the rise in the cost of living. Employers may offer a COLA to help employees maintain their purchasing power as prices increase over time. So it's not exactly a raise, even though you're getting more money a month.
To basically keep up with the rising costs of
Inflation.
services or inflation products. COLAs are also often applied annually and are based on the inflation rates that we just talked about and changes in the cost of living index. They're more common in certain industries, though, such as government jobs, than in others. So you may not expect COLA, or cost of living adjustment, for certain types of jobs or certain types of industries. It may not be expected, but you might get bonuses instead, or you might get merit-based increases based on performance rather than what the cost of living is, or inflation is impacting cost of living.
And that's another important consideration whenever you're examining job offers. But anyhow, it's also worth noting that COLAs can differ significantly across employers. Some might offer generous adjustments, while others may offer minimal increases or none at all.
So when you're considering a job or a job offer or negotiating your salary, it's really important to ask about COLA policies or cost of living adjustment policies and how they're determined. This can be really important if you're moving to a high cost area, for example, especially like, let's say you are being transferred somewhere. It's important to ask about what COLA might exist for that adjustment to a new living arrangement.
That's a great point. So if you're thinking about relocating, here's some key factors to consider. Here we go. Number one, housing costs. Consider your rent or mortgage, your property taxes, and your utilities. 2, take a look at the employment opportunities, like the job market and the salary ranges in your field. 3, taxes. Income, sales, and property taxes can vary widely from place to place, even like we said earlier, from street to street. So take that into consideration. Healthcare, access to medical facilities and insurance costs. Springfield is great. We have a great medical community, and I know that Chicago does, and so Champaign is very fortunate to have that as well. Your education, quality and cost of schools if you have children, transportation, like we said earlier in Chicago, public transit availability, and commuting costs, and your lifestyle, like the cost of groceries, dining out, and entertainment.
It's also a good idea to use cost of living calculators. We can link a few in the show notes to compare different areas based on your current salary and expenses. If you are currently thinking about how you're spending your money on your current salary. For students, that might not be the case. There might not be a frame of reference for maintaining your same standard of living now, right? Since you're going to be moving to a completely different type of lifestyle.
And once you have a good grasp on the cost of living in your potential new location, you know what time it is. It's time to build a budget.
So you've heard us talk about budgets before, but you can start by listing your fixed expenses like rent or mortgage, your variable expenses like utilities. Car payments are another fixed expense if you have to have a car. In more southern or central Illinois, you kind of need it to get around. Some jobs require it, depending on what type of job you have. We'll also link to our budgeting episode so you can get more ideas about how to build a budget and what methods might work best for you. If one method doesn't work for you, try a different method.
And you can listen to Nikki because we all love and miss her. So, we love the throwback episodes because we can all say hi to Nikki. She's always there. And don't forget to account for savings and emergency funds. Life is unpredictable, unfortunately, and having a financial cushion is crucial.
That is very true. And especially if you are moving to a different area, you don't know what kinds of risks exist. There might be costs that you didn't account for when you were building your budget. So that emergency funding, that emergency padding can really help you with those types of expenses that pop up maybe quarterly or annually instead of every month. And then you always want to regularly review and adjust your budget as needed. The cost of living can change, as we've already demonstrated, and so can your financial situation. We've talked about income volatility and financial fragility as well in previous episodes. So you can kind of think about how emergency funds can help you with preventing those financial crises from impacting you too much.
So I hope that we gave you a better understanding of COLAs and what to consider whenever you're making decisions on where you want to live, where you want to go to school, where you want to work and enjoy your life. So I really enjoyed today's episode and just covering cost of living and focusing on things that impact decisions that are crucial right when you get out of college or when you're making decisions as to where you're going to study, but also taking cost of living into account whenever you're making big decisions is just really important.
I agree with Kimber. Thanks for listening. We are definitely going to put a lot of stuff in the show notes because cost of living can be complicated, but there are a lot of tools to help you with any financial transitions. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share Making Sense of Money on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, SoundCloud, or Spotify.